Very
Thank you
good
so
afternoon
much.
to all of you. It's my pleasure to be among you for discussing waste management issues, which I believe more or less have common issues in all the neighboring countries, including India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan. Uh, so what I've done is I've tried to, as Gina suggested, I've tried to put in few slides because the time was limited. So I basically go quickly around municipal solid waste management, overall waste management scenario, bit on plastic waste, looking at what kind of regulatory evolution in terms of rules and regulations are happening because of some of the recent events, and also on the electronic waste. Why? I mean, we also need to manage electronic waste in a proper manner. So can we go to the first slide, people? Yeah. So this is actually a slide taken from a World Bank report, which looks at waste management in high income, medium income, and low income countries. And it's a recent report, a very interesting report, and looks at how waste management, waste generation has been recorded over the years, and how it is going to look like towards the end of the century. And if you look at these graphs, they show that in most of the countries, the waste management generation has plateaued. Can you go to the previous? Yeah. So waste management generation, waste generation has plateaued, except for countries in African continent, African subcontinent, and also countries in Asian continent, where we all know that economic development is still happening, and a lot of urbanization is still happening. As a result, the wastes are still growing. And that is a challenge because we already have limited resources to manage waste from these countries, in these countries. And when the waste increases, then there's a problem on how we have to efficiently manage the waste. Developing countries, the report concludes that developing countries are still grappling with issues like uncontrolled dumping. Very few cities in these countries have scientific landfill disposal sites. Mostly the waste is dumped in low-lying areas. And often such waste dumping causes open burning of waste, which not only leads to air pollution, but also leads to emission of methane, which is a greenhouse gas. And yeah, we can go to the next one, Deepak. In the next one, from the same slide, frames from the same report, what I've tried to capture is waste management in some of the these countries, not specifically South Asia, but including South Asia as well, but also countries with comparable economic profile. And you can see that waste generation, for example, in Armenia, has a smaller country, it's very low. Cambodia is still lower, but comparable countries, if you look at Bangladesh, Egypt, a little higher in Indonesia, a little lower in Pakistan, but India is supposed to be very high. We are in fact next to only to US in the sense, if you look at countries after US and China, because of the high population, we generate high amount of waste, overall around 168 million tons per annum. And interestingly, if you see, most of these countries have some legislation in place. Then here in the second column, you see year represented here. So in this year, a comprehensive waste management rule was introduced in these countries. And of course, these rules have been evolving over the period. But this is to show that most of the countries have legislation in place, but they're still grappling with basic problem of waste management. Last but one column is a processing facility, waste processing facility. And you see it varies from very low of around 5.3% to a very high of around 75% reported for Armenia. And that essentially means that if you have low waste processing capability, then you dispose more and more to the landfill site. And that is where the problem is, because one is it's not scientific disposal happening. Second, the cities are urbanizing, so we get less and less space to dispose waste. So locating new and new disposal site becomes increasingly difficult, and there's very little resource recovery, recycling happening. So we have to depend on land for disposal of waste as of now. Next slide. So these with these I mean earlier two slides, what I've tried to do, I mean specific to the situation in India, I've tried to capture what are the key waste management issues, especially if you look at municipal solid waste management. I'll come to other two waste streams a little later. Weak implementation of legislation, which runs commonly through all the countries. And many times what happens is, even if the legislation is notified, it takes long time for legislation to be finalized and notified. So by the time rules are notified, the situation on ground changes. Lack of waste segregation at source. There are large cities which have been successful in segregating around 90% of waste from their households, but smaller cities still struggle. And there has to be a mechanism basically to look at how waste segregation at source can be improved. Inadequate disposal, as I said earlier, most of the disposal happens in unsanitary landfills, unscientific landfill sites. There are few cities which have sanitary landfills, but they are only few. And as a result, what happens is there's something like when you look at biogas plants, if you dispose all your waste unsegregated in the landfill sites, they generate landfill gas. And landfill gas has large amount of methane coming out from the landfills. And methane is a greenhouse gas. So there's an uncontrolled discharge of landfill gas. And also, in addition, leachate also gets generated. When the rainfall comes, the waste gets dissolved in water and goes away from the landfill site. And this liquid, which is rich in waste material, is called leachate in the scientific terms. So leachate contamination, leachate pollution, landfill gas emission is very common in the large landfills in some of our countries. In addition, what happens is even if these are municipal waste dump sites, many times a small amount of waste generated from other sources also reach municipal waste dump site. For example, biomedical waste from small facilities, small healthcare facilities, slaughterhouse waste from small slaughtering operations, industrial waste again from small industrial scale units often reach municipal waste dumping site, and they cause problem because they are essentially infectious and hazardous in nature. So they create problem with sanitary workers and waste pickers who are working at the landfill sites for picking up recyclables. In India, we have something, a regulatory agency, which is called Central Pollution Control Board. So Central Pollution Control Board has now clearly indicated that if you continue dumping your waste on land, and if you don't look for resource recovery and resource recovery maximization, then you would require around 66,000 hectares of land for a 20-year period, and which is a very high requirement of a land. On an annual basis, around 20-40 hectares per year is required if you don't process your waste. And that's a huge requirement for the city. And most of the cities are now finding it problematic to locate a new waste disposal site. Next, Deepak. If you look at, I'll briefly touch on the legislation. There is the legislation for India on municipal solid waste was first time notified in year 2000. Subsequently, in the year 2016, this legislation was re-notified. Many of the elements are same as it was in 2000, but there are many new elements which are introduced. Broadly, what any solid waste legislation would state that managing the solid waste is a problem of the urban local body and local institutions, and they need to basically ensure that primary collection of waste happens properly in a segregated manner. Its storage in a segregated manner should happen. Segregated transport and processing, waste processing, and finally, things which cannot be processed or recycled has to only go for disposal site. There is an emphasis, therefore, on a need for segregation. The legislation also bans organic waste disposal in the landfills, because as I told, if the organic waste go to the landfill, they generate something which is called landfill gas, and which becomes a polluting gas, not only in terms of climate, but also in terms of air pollution. The rules also promote recycling and organic waste processing. And very interestingly, the rules in 2016 realized that, and you also would realize that there are many waste streams in municipal solid waste which are not recyclable. For example, your footwear, worn out footwear, your worn out dresses, leather jackets or mattresses or pillows. These are things which are not easy to recycle, but they are having sufficient calorific value, so they can be cut to smaller pieces, turned into something which we call refuse derived fuel. RDF here stands for refuse derived fuel. And rules also recognize that if the refuse calorific value of such waste is more than 1500 kilocalories per kg, then they can also be used as an energy source, either in industrial process, or interestingly, in India, we also have a lot of cement plants operating on coal. So these fuel pellets, which are obtained from waste, they can also replace coal in the manufacturing of cement, and thus can save on coal and becomes a green energy option. As a result of solid waste management rules, there's another parallel legislation which has been framed, which is still at the draft stage, but it's expected to be finalized soon, which is called Draft Natural Resource Efficiency Policy. And resource efficiency has been accorded very high priority now, linking it with circular economy. That action has to be taken for achieving high resource efficiency, not only in manufacturing sector, but including waste sector as well. And if you see, there are various sectors which have been part of action plan on national resource efficiency policy. These include automobiles, including electric vehicles, chemicals, including plastics, and plastics, once they become a waste, they become a part of waste stream. Building and construction, electronic waste, including e-waste, electronics, including e-waste. And there are sectors which are very resource efficient, very resource intensive sectors, like solar PV manufacturing, steel industry, aluminum industry. So from the waste management legislation, we are trying to move slowly towards improving resource efficiency by drafting national resource efficiency policy as a key tool to achieving circular economy in not only manufacturing sector, but also in the waste management sector as well. Next one. This is the slide which tries to capture what is a waste management scenario, what has been waste management scenario. Obviously, this is example for India. From 2001 to 2051, estimated 2051. And one big difference which you can see in the early years, the population was growing much higher and waste was not getting generated in the same proportion. But what has happened is, subsequently, when the economy started opening up, when the urbanization started happening at a faster pace, when goods were manufactured at much faster pace, the waste generation also increased, which you can see, which is evident by red bars in between, how waste generation has actually leapfrogged from earlier low level of waste generation to now high level of waste generation. And now, the population, the growth in population, the waste generation rates are almost reaching the growth in population overall for the countries. And this is a matter of concern because, if you don't maximize resource recovery from our waste streams, then soon we'll not have any space to dispose the waste. Next one. What we have also tried to do is we have tried to capture what I've told you, most of the waste goes to the landfill sites. And if this continues to happen, then what's the kind of greenhouse gas emission impact on these wastes? And the slide on left-hand side tells you the situation which was there in India around 15 years back, where it was the trajectory which I have drawn as it shows that greenhouse gas emissions were supposed to increase with the increase in waste generation over the years. Fortunately, because of some stiff policy measures since 2014, and also looking at waste management in the mission mode, there have been now perceptible changes which are now seen that greenhouse gas emissions have started slowly following the lowering trend. And now we can confidently say that if these policies are implemented in a right manner, then the greenhouse gas over the years is going to come down. Next slide. From the municipal solid waste, I'll quickly switch over to plastic waste scenario. And this again, I'll show you a recent study which was done by an organization called CIPET. CIPET is an organization which does a lot of plastic research in India. And they have come out with an inventory of plastic waste in different cities in India. And key inference from here is because we were not knowing how much of the total municipal solid waste generation, which is there in the cities, how much of that is plastic waste. So key inference of this study is that on an average, around 10% of all the waste generated in the cities, 10% of the municipal solid waste is plastic waste. And this plastic waste, I'll in subsequent slides let you know why. I mean, we have been so concerned about plastic waste management issues in the region. Next one. What are the key issues on managing plastic waste? If you look at our overall plastic consumption portfolio in Asian countries, the per capita is still very low. In India, now we have reached around 13 kg per capita per annum, which is, if you look at global average is around 25 kg, and countries in Europe and US are much higher. So our per capita consumption is still low, but what is a matter of concern is packaging waste. Of the total plastic consumption, around 44-45% of the plastic consumption is in terms of packaging waste. While packaging is good because it provides commodity chips or wafers or food stuff, which is packed in it a long shelf life of around 6 months. But if this packaging is not managed properly, then it becomes a problem. So generally, all the packaging material used in food packaging ends up as a packaging waste. Sometimes they are reused if they are good quality packaging, but mostly recycled. But there are packaging materials which, because of use, become very dirty to recycle, or I mean, they are very low value plastics, so they are not recycled properly, and they end up in landfills. And sometimes they are also disposed in drains in the cities. Mountain areas, it's quite common that plastic packaging is disposed in drain side and often causes choking of these drains. So clogging of drains, urban flooding also can happen because of plastic waste mismanagement. In the landfill sites, they cause fire, and hence it's a cause of pollution. Open burning in the cities, in winter times, it's very common in the region that people who are outside, staying outside or out on the roads, they sometimes burn plastic waste to keep them warm. So that's also one concern because it causes air pollution. Biggest concern nowadays is because the plastic waste, if it's not managed in a proper manner, it's leading to marine pollution of marine waters and what we call now a marine litter problem, which is, I mean, to us, after a climate change debate, has become a second most debated issue globally. Recycling of plastic packaging happens in the region, but most of the recycling happens in informal sector. And that is why there is a concern in terms of choice of the technology, obsolete technology being used for recycling. And many times recycled products are not of good quality. So downcycling is also a matter of concern. And multi-layered packaging, which you also showed in a waste bin wafers packet, they are a cause of concern because they cannot be recycled. There's no technology as of now where MLPs can be recycled, multi-layered packaging can be recycled. So they still remain a cause of concern. Next one. These are a few slides which I've tried to capture with you. I've tried to link with why, I mean, we are calling plastics a big problem in terms of pollution of coastal waters and also marine litter problem. And you can see a city, a town located next to a coast, all the waste which is disposed on the side of the backwater eventually will go into coastal water and form a part of marine debris. Similarly, fishing nets used by fishing community has become a big problem once they are discarded. They are also thrown into coastal water and they also become big problem. Next one. I'll briefly touch on the salient features of plastic waste management rules. I also already discussed solid waste management rule. Plastic waste management rules were also notified like municipal solid waste rules in 2016. And what it proposes to do is, earlier the permitted thickness of plastic carry bags was around 15 microns. Now they have increased it to 75 microns. So no carry bags in the market are now available which are less than 75 microns since September 2021. And they'll further increase it to 120 micron from 31st December 2022. Each plastic bag or multi-layered packaging now will have to be, when they are printed in the market for marketing, they'll have to have information on who is the manufacturer, what is the registration number of that manufacturer, what is the thickness of the bag, and all these information has to be printed on a plastic bag. No manufacturer shall manufacture carry bag or recycled plastic bag or multi-layered packaging unless they have obtained registration from Pollution Control Board, State Pollution Control Board. And there's also a requirement for retailers and street vendors on what kind of plastic bags they can provide and what kind of plastic bags they should keep. And if they are found violating these, then they are liable to be fined by the city government. And similarly, there's also similar requirement for bulk generators, institution premises, school, colleges, hospitals, not only to store plastic waste properly, but keep it separate from other kinds of waste and hand over the segregated waste to municipal authorities. Or, I mean, if they have private waste management authorities for collection and recycling of this plastic waste. Next. Now, looking at marine litter issues, there were some key aspects which were brought further in the amendment of these rules last year. And some of the key features of this is, since I told you multi-layered plastics are not recyclable, so there's still a problem. So now the rules also mention that these multi-layered plastic packaging can be shredded and can be used in construction of roads. And there has been a standard as per Indian Road Congress guidelines, which lays down the procedure for not only laying the roads, but also recovery of energy and pyrolysis of these multi-layered plastics into useful oil products. The key element of plastic waste management rule, like electronic waste management rule also, which I'll discuss later, is that the EPR is the central theme. Extended producer responsibility is the central theme of these rules. So manufacturers and producers who are putting up plastic packaging in the market or who are putting up plastic packaging in the waste stream, now they have the responsibility of also collecting it back. So the rule clearly says that manufacturers and producers cannot escape their responsibility, and they have to work with the city governments very closely to ensure that whatever waste they put in market has same amount is collected back and sent for recycling. The amendment also, for the first time, recognizes something which we call single-use plastics. And single-use plastics have become really global problem because these are thrown generally after single use and are very low-value plastic materials. So they are not collected for recycling, and then they contribute to marine litter. And the rules also recognize the fact that single-use plastics mismanagement contributes to marine litter. Next slide. In the next slide, I'll quickly run you through some of the very familiar items made of plastics, which actually have been phased out from the country starting 1st July this year. Things like earbuds, the plastic component of the earbud, plastic sticks for the balloons, candies, ice cream, straws, and also in the second phase, things like plastic-based plates, cups, glasses. They all been this list says they all been now phased out, and country is looking at alternatives. And many of the manufacturers, I'll give you some examples, quick examples on how manufacturers have been looking at replacing some of these with alternative items, alternative materials. Next one. Interestingly, when we were looking at alternatives to plastic waste, we found that there is something which event which is happening very interestingly across many cities in India, is something, a concept called zero waste stores, where more and more now retail stores, they are promoting, which we used to do earlier in the older days. When we used to go to shops, we used to go with our own bags and our own containers also, for example, taking milk or taking oil. Now the stores are again promoting this older concepts back, and either they are giving reusable containers to customers where they can take grocery in their reusable container and bring them back when they want the next consignment, or I mean they're charging a little amount from the customers on packaging, and when they return their packaging, they refund that small value which they charge from customer, so that customer has an incentive to look at reducing packaging. And these stores are called zero waste stores. Now we have around 23 of them spread across the country, and numbers are increasing. Next one. Yeah, I've quickly tried to capture some of the, I'll not read it, but I mean, I'm sure the slides will be shared with you. Some of the e-retailers, what initiatives these e-retailers have taken, and some of these names might be quite familiar: Amazon, Flipkart, Hindustan Unilever, branch of Unilever. IRCTC is a company which manages travel and transport in the country. So they have committed to replacing plastic packaging by mostly cardboard-based packaging, by mostly fiber-based packaging, and how they have committed to do away with single-use plastic packaging and slowly moving towards the alternatives to single-use plastics. Next one. Similar is some initiatives with companies called ITC, which is into largely on hospitality and also hotel business and grocery FMCG items. Tata Chemicals, another company in India, Big Basket, which is into distribution of grocery items on e-platform, and how they have shifted to more durable crate-based systems rather than using plastic packaging and sending material in packaging. Next. So very quickly on the third section of the presentation, what I'll do is I'll straight away start with e-waste rules, and why with the municipal solid waste rules and with plastic waste we decided to club e-waste. Because of the very fact that usage of electronic products is something which has been increasing very fast at a much unprecedented rate, because life span of the electronic items are reducing, and we are changing our electronic items more frequently than before. So like other two rules, the electronic waste management rules, though first time they were notified in 2011, so recently in 2016 they were again re-notified, bringing in some elements on how basically electronic waste has to be managed in a proper manner. And rules, they empower key elements of the rule. They empower concerned state agencies to control, supervise, regulate activities regarding e-waste management. And these activities can be clubbed into collection of e-waste, segregation into different items, dismantling, and recycling and recovery of resources. Extended producer responsibility is the central theme of the rule, like plastic waste management rule. So it's manufacturers and producers of electronic waste and also retailers of the electronic waste which are held responsible for tracking the e-waste down and bringing that back into recycling chain. There's a provision of registered dismantlers in the rules. Sorry, if you can go back. Yeah, there's a provision of registered dismantlers and recyclers in the rule, and targets are given to manufacturers to reduce hazardous waste, because one of the unwanted feature of e-waste is they contain some of the hazardous elements also, lead, chromium, cadmium, things which contain these materials, mercury at times. So they need to be, there is also clear target on manufacturers on how they can reduce usage of hazardous waste in their product designs. And hazardous waste rules also clearly says that while recycling the electronic waste, if there is some hazardous waste generation, then it has to be disposed in a proper hazardous waste landfill. The next one. The key issues on e-waste, as I said, this is one of the fastest growing waste streams. So there's urgent action required in terms of how we manage our e-waste, and we can't leave them lying here and there. Transboundary movement is a matter of concern, because many times what happens is some of the waste flows to developing countries from developed countries for resource recovery and recycling. And if the resource recovery and recycling is not done in a scientific manner, then it causes pollution. And why pollution? Because improper recycling still is done in a lot of informal sector. You would you look at Google, you'll find a lot of improper e-waste recycling, not only in Asia, but also in Africa, causing a lot of pollution and contamination. And as a result, contamination of soil and groundwater happens. Also, ultimately, this pollution affects human health, especially people who are residing in this area. These areas where e-waste handling or management and recycling is done, they are also adversely impacted by this. So go to the next one. So what is the need for a waste management sector? What we call now is something where we are trying to decarbonize lesser and lesser dependence on fossil fuel, and lesser dependence on processes which use fossil fuel, so that less and less emission happens from the different sectors, and waste management sector is also no exception. So Government of India, as a policy measure, has given priority to low carbon circular economy based solutions. And I'll look at quickly some of these solutions, and then we can open the floor for question and answers. So now current priority is low carbon circular economy based solutions, focusing on diverting waste from the landfill, no more waste to the landfills, and maximizing resource recovery. And these two lines can be captured in the next slide, which is my last one. So these are suggested waste solutions for circular economy, reducing resource consumption, and strategies looking at product design, designing the product in such a way that they reduce waste and increase resource recovery. Setting up a material recovery facility. Material recovery facility is the facility where different waste after collection are brought together, and then they are further sorted into different categories, and then they are sent for recycling. And looking at technologies like biomethanation, producing biogas from waste, composting of the waste, of the organic waste, wet organic waste, recycling of paper, plastic, glass, metal, and things which I gave you example of earlier, which cannot be recycled, but still have sufficient calorific value. They can be processed into something which is called refuse derived fuel, and they can be used as an alternate fuel in the cement plants. So with these few slides, I'll end my presentation. I think this was the last one. The next one. Yeah, so thank you very much for your patience. And I'll now be happy to take up questions which you might have in the session.
Thank you so much, Suneel. I believe, let me just double check what I'm showing, but I believe you have just beat the record in number of questions of our previous two speakers. I needed to make the font smaller and it still ran into 2 pages. I try to cluster it a little bit.
Sure.
It might be a bit imperfect due to the volume and then the time needed. So you did mention a couple of points. I will just briefly go through those and then I will let you react. It's not that the floor is closed for questions at the moment, it's just given the time we have. I think it is really good we have deep dive and 3 working groups. So some of those can be maybe also tackled there. So in general, I started with how can circular economy help with waste management in developing countries? What about specific solutions here, organic waste or fertilizers? Then there is issue of rich countries, and we are still having this repercussion of China not buying waste anymore, and what happened after that, that has never been resolved. But would be wonderful to hear from you about this. Then there is issue of slum communities and health issues related with landfills and pandemic as well. I kind of added because they both touch upon health. So that's why I just cluster them together. Then the issue of behavior, recycling and upcycling in South Asia in particular, and the behavior changes, whether they worked. Then there's a lot about garbage dumps and health, nutrition. How can we eliminate this? So many countries don't have fiscal space to properly manage. Then I added here, because it was still about landfills, land reclamation, but also methane capturing. And then a specific question about initiatives in Himalayan region for tourism and related waste management, which now with reopening of the borders, just for everybody, I enabled transcription because somebody requested. We had this option. And then the about EV, and then what to do about e-waste, as you mentioned. There are some solutions about Bhutan and sustainability tax. So what is your comment about it? And then there is more about solution and plastic, specifically about ban, incentive, recycling, and then definition of waste and reusable resource, which I think will be related. Then still more about resource management, safety protocols, single-use plastic ban. I think like I will move it further to the plastic, Basel Convention about hazardous waste. And then there is lung cancer, it is like toxic waste and the consequences of it. And then that was the recent question, how successful are waste management and environment protective policy measure in developing countries, for example, Pakistan. So I will just keep it on. And then if you wish me to move, I will do that. I hope you can see the solution. You also have it on the chat, but I don't think you will be able to address all of this, but just give it a try as much as feasible for the next 15 minutes.
Some of it, I mean, just to summarize some of these concerns. See, what happens is the region, not only South Asia, but other similar economies, what you can't wish away is waste picker community. Informal sector will always be there in the waste management, and they will essentially be on lookout for recyclables and more materials which you use, material which has certain amount of recycling potential. They'll always be on lookout for picking that up. So best strategy in terms of how do we still, and fortunately or unfortunately, the labor cost in region is quite low. So all the manual work in terms of waste picking, in terms of waste sorting, in terms of waste collection, can be very effectively done by informal sector. And they have been in waste management since ages. And their skills can be advantageously used in waste management. Whenever someone, a city tries to improve the waste management, they have to also not forget that informal sector is there. And if they involve these people not only in waste collection from house to house in a segregated manner, but also ensuring that waste remains sorted after collection. they can very successfully do the waste management in the cities. Another issue which we have learned over the years is that there's a time now to do away with requirement of disposal of requirement of large amount of land for developing disposal sites. And in practice, though, I mean, it looks a little simple, but it's little difficult to practice because, I mean, someone else also pointed out on behavioral change, how difficult or how easy it is to impart or change behaviors. So in practice, what is required is waste, especially if you look at municipal solid waste, because that's the most problematic. One needs to ensure that we, in the simple terms, call them as a two broad categories, though there's a third category as well, wet waste and dry waste. And dry waste is all the recyclables, and wet waste is all the food waste and green waste and all that. And these two should not be mixed. And to the extent possible, the green waste needs to be processed close to the source of generation, near the households. If there are large marketplaces or large restaurants, hotels, or a large school or institutional premise, they need to be processed close to these facilities, so that these are not to be transported to disposal site. Because one of the main problem of disposal sites is the landfill gas generation. And if the organic waste doesn't reach, the landfill site, there'll be no issue of landfill gas generation. And this organic waste can be very easily converted into compost, or if there is a large amount of waste, because we are a large country, so there are many cities who generate very large amount of waste. I'm not talking of, I'm talking of waste generations in terms of 100 to 100 tons per day or more. And if there's a such large amount of waste generation, it can be also processed into biogas. Interestingly, what we are now looking at, that there's also possibility of when you install a large biogas plants, there's also possibility of processing this biogas into something which we call compressed biogas, where in a biogas, typical methane concentration is around 45% or 50%. It is raised to more than 90%. And if the gas has more than 90% methane, then it's called, and it's also pressurized like normal compressed natural gas, then it is called compressed biogas, and it can be used in the similar manner as CNG, even for transport fuel, or I mean for industrial application. So that is something which is very attractive. Of course, I mean there has been question also on circular economy issues. Circular economy remains a key to ensuring that waste management, the waste management becomes a revenue giving stream, and also the maximum resources in the waste can be extracted from the waste before it is finally sent for disposal. And it is also very true in terms of for sectors like I discussed electronic waste, because electronic waste, electronic items, we know that they contain a lot of very valuable material in terms of rare earth metals, in terms of plastics, in terms of metals, and these have limited supply in nature. So if they're not recycled back from electronic waste or any electronic product or any product for that sense, maybe automobile, maybe other utilities, we are soon going to run out on many of these materials. So it has to be, it is essential to basically recycle these from the waste streams and recover from these waste streams so that they can be brought back into production process, which is a heart of circular economy process. So circular economy certainly has a large role to play. Regarding, there was a question also on how we can look at if the landfill has a landfill gas, how that can be used. Unfortunately, what happens is most of the disposal sites in India and elsewhere, in other countries, here in South Asia, they are not scientific landfills. So they are not, when I call scientific landfills are lined from the bottom. so that there is no leachate going out from the landfill. And they're also, once the landfill landfills are exhausted, then they're also covered from the top, so that no gases they escape. And then while constructing these scientific landfills, you also lay down gas collection pipes while constructing these landfills, so that when the gas starts generating, then these pipes can send the gas to common point where they are very similar to biogas again, landfill gases. They can be used for energy recovery. So energy recovery is possible, but only if the landfills are scientific. I'm sure when you go on your study trips in Germany, you might see examples of how large waste disposal sites can be used for energy recovery by tapping the landfill gas. Yeah, so these were some of the key aspects.